So I think we're all set. Everything is working. Okay. So let's start then, since we're all everything works. It's a bit strange, as you know, to talk to somebody on a camera. I mean, talking to yourself, actually, having a camera in front of you, very different from real life situation where you're actually there. But this is also another way to communicate. So let's start then. The topic is how to prepare our students for ELT exams using online resources. I think we all have to do it now. It's the new reality. And a few years ago, people were saying that maybe books will be replaced by tablets, laptops, and everything will be online, but we're still using the physical printed books. So they're still here, books. We still use books. But this new reality made us rethink and try to incorporate the new technology. So now let's move on. So just to begin with, online learning, internet have changed the way we teach and learn a foreign language. We have so many resources. For example, pronunciation. We can go online and listen to how a word is pronounced. I mean, if you remember in the past, that was very difficult to do. So many different resources, videos, listening, etc. And of course, a lot of interactive websites where students can do exercises, and so there's so many different options. And of course, the rise of the online learning during the COVID-19 pandemic made us more aware of that. So we started searching of what's available to use. All of a sudden, we all had to spend time trying to find resources. That probably, as busy teachers, we didn't have the time to go online and search because we have the books to use, so that meant more work for us. So all of a sudden, the online part of teaching became so important. And now, coming to exams, we even have now proctored and computer-based exams. I mean, we had computer-based, but now we even have proctored exams, and we'll talk about it in detail. And of course, the global online learning industry is booming. There's so many different sites. It's amazing. I mean, you have so many different options. Skype, Zoom, so many different software available. So let's move on and talk about in detail about online learning. First of all, let's try to clarify and put everything into, try to have, to put them in order, like to make it easier for us to talk about and have different categories. Now, the different types of learning, so we will talk about this in detail. Then we have to answer this question: which type of learning is more appropriate for us, teaching a foreign language, and especially teaching exams? Then we will talk about advantages, disadvantages, what's available, so many online learning tools, and actually every day there are more and different and new things that we can use online. And then about the new thing, which is the proctored exams, which actually is taking the exam at home And now, thanks to the new software, there's a way to check whether you're cheating or not. I mean, if it's possible, if it can be done. Okay, so now let's move on. The various types of e-learning. So maybe you are all familiar with that because there's so many different talks, presentations about e-learning, online learning, distant learning, and this is the new reality. And actually, some people are saying that maybe in the future, even if there is a vaccine, and we go back to classes, things might be different. Like, for example, if you go to an office, you will go only once a week, taking the elevator, the lift to go upstairs. You won't have to push the button, you just use your voice. So many different things that most of the week you will be working from home. Let's see what happens to teaching, if there will be permanent changes when it comes to teaching, or we will go back to normal as it was in the last year. Okay, so one thing is the synchronous online learning, asynchronous, fixed learning, adaptive, interactive online learning, and collaborative online learning. I think you guess from the words actually what this is about, what most of these types of e-learning are about. I mean, you get an idea, but let's talk in detail about all these things. Now, synchronous online learning is when the learning takes place at the same time, live. So you're talking to students like using a software, Skype, Zoom, online chat, video conferencing, like we're doing now in real life. In real-time synchronous online learning. So you have to use online chats and video conferencing. And of course, it's in a way, it simulates a real-life classroom, because actually you have the students in front of you, you can see them if you have a webcam. And in a way, it's closer to a real-life classroom compared to all the other types of e-learning. Of course, it has limitations. Good internet connection is important. Everybody needs, all the students need to have a laptop, a camera. They have to be all well equipped with all these things. Now, let's move on to the next slide, which is the opposite, asynchronous online learning, which is the opposite of what we talked earlier. It's having your students study on their own at different times and places from each other. So there is no real life communication. I mean, they might be studying anytime they want, during the day, at midnight, very early in the morning. But this, which seems to be a disadvantage, on the other hand, it's also an advantage because it gives flexibility. So it's like working from home. I mean, when we work from home, we can start proofreading even 1 o'clock in the morning, or very late, very early. So, but again, you don't have, there's something missing, the communication, the real-time communication. And you don't have any interaction with other students. So the classroom is complete. There is no classroom anymore. It's just you studying on your own and getting feedback later on. Now, the fixed e-learning. Another type of e-learning is, again, that all students receive the same information, same activities, So it lacks one of the big advantages of e-learning, which is that you can cater to individual students' needs. With fixed e-learning, they all do the same. So you don't adapt to individual students' needs. Because the nice thing with e-learning, online learning, is that you can get a lot of information about individual students and then decide what to teach, where to put the emphasis on. So have a more individualized kind of, more student-centered approach when you teach. So it misses that element. They all get the same. And then the adaptive, which the exact opposite again, which thanks to all the data, the information we get using computers, online learning, we can decide how to adapt to each individual learner. And then, which is a very nice thing, change the way we teach. And actually, ideally, that's the goal of our lesson. Even in the old days when we used to be in the classroom, try to be as far as possible more student-centered than if we have the time, there aren't so many students in the class, try to adjust and to each individual student's needs. Although it's very hard sometimes in a big classroom. Now, in the collaborative learning, again, it's based on the idea of the classroom that students benefit by being in a classroom in a group of students. So they interact with each other and also they improve team working abilities. There's interaction, they improve their communication skills. So it has a lot to offer. And it's also, again, simulates the classroom situation. Since, again, we have a group of students, it's not one-to-one. So it's closer to what we used to do last year when we used to be in the classroom. Now, since now we very briefly explain the different types of the different approaches of online learning, that was a very short summary. Now let's think about the advantages, the limitations, what they have to offer, and what we need, what it's best for us, for our situation, and then also talk about the disadvantages. So let's start about the advantages of e-learning. First of all is self-paced, so that means the student studies on their own. He's at home, so they can decide, or even the students themselves decide how much time to spend, when. There's a flexibility. Unless there's a live session like we're having now, which again, it's in a live session, the teacher gives some feedback, but again, most of the time students have to study at home. It can be more student-centered, as we mentioned, because we have all this data that we get using computers. So we can draw conclusions on what to focus on and try to adjust our lessons depending on the feedback we get. We can change the learning environment. For example, a student can study at their own home. It's very different, or it might be an online platform. And the data that I mentioned, we get analytics, we get a lot of details. For example, how often do they go online, what they do, especially if there's an online platform. We get feedback and details about how often do they do the exercises. Sometimes we get a score graded, they're automatically graded, so we get just an email with their score and their performance very quickly. And also time efficient. They don't have to, you can do it at home. You don't have to drive or to take the bus to go somewhere to have your lessons. You're just in your room. And then you decide to have an online lesson. So it's really a very time efficient procedure. So have all this in mind. Maybe many of these, if you already started teaching online, they're obvious. I mean, maybe you're already aware of all these things. But it's nice to have them all organized in front of you. Now, let's go in detail. They plan their own time at their convenience. And again, deciding the way you want to study gives you more satisfaction and you're more motivated. And it's a less stressful, I mean, instead of having somebody else to decide when to have or how often to have a lesson, and deciding you can plan your time and the way you study makes it, it's more student friendly. Now, the individualistic learning methods are, as I mentioned, the greatest advantages of e-learning. You can get all this data and try to focus on adjusting your lesson depending on your students. And now let's move on to the disadvantages. The main problem is the feedback, which is the big advantage of the classroom as it used to be, the real-life classroom. I mean, you had your students in front of you, they made a mistake, you were there. Or they wanted to ask a question, you were there to answer them. So, online learning, there's something missing. Even if you have live sessions like we're doing now, you cannot spend a lot of time and it's complicated. Even having a video conferencing with many students, it lacks this real-life feedback that we used to give when we were in a real-life classroom. So this is one of the biggest problems when you teach online. Now, because you are at home, it causes social isolation. You are on your own in front of a screen, like we're doing now. Not the nicest thing to do, talking to a screen. You cannot see the faces of people and see the reactions. For example, by looking at your students in a real-life classroom, you can get an idea whether they have understood what you're saying, whether they're bored, interested, happy, sad, all these things. And again, this leads to lack of motivation, and there's also a problem with time management. Probably you read some articles online. The biggest problem for people working from home is time management, because you don't have an office, so you have to decide when to work, unless you have a strict deadline, but you can start a bit later. You can procrastinate. You can postpone it for later. You can do it very late at night. So this can lead to a serious time management problem. And to be able to perform well in an online environment, you need to have strong self-motivation. And imagine how difficult this is for teenagers. and good time management skills. Instead of being in a classroom, you're at home. So it's up to you to decide how to spend your time. So that's a problem, especially for young students, as you know. They're not very willing to study anyway. Again, we have the lack of communication skills. It's hard to interact with each other. I mean, there are ways to overcome these problems with having like a Zoom meeting with a lot of people, but again, it's not very easy to do that. I mean, it becomes a bit complicated. You can do it once, twice, but again, it's not, you have to get used to it. There are limitations. Trying to have a group of people working together and giving feedback together, all in a Zoom meeting. Now, cheating prevention. Imagine, as I said, now we have new exams with proctoring. It's the new thing. So imagine taking an exam at home, having some software and ID verification using a software. How different this is. And again, online instructors, teachers, that's another thing. We tend to focus more on theory, and it's hard to practice online. It's much more complicated. It lacks face-to-face communication, we mentioned that. And e-learning is not always appropriate for everything. I think for English, maybe it's not that hard compared to other disciplines. And another very important thing is, okay, I think teenagers are not computer illiterate anymore, but especially for older students might be a problem if they're very, they can use computers, Zoom, cameras, all these things. And again, a big problem trying to find a course online or using something that you found online is the quality. This is a problem with the internet. As you know, there's so many things you can find, but you don't know whether they are valid. I mean, you get a lot of information. Is this true? Like, that's why we have the fake news. That's a new term that has been added to the dictionary. Fake news. It's because of the internet. Nobody can check what's published online. So, what you find online, courses, software, platforms, you don't know whether they're appropriate, they're validated. So there's always this issue. Is this good for my students? Can I use it? That's one of the big problems of the internet in general, that there's no way to, you have to use reliable resources. And in many cases, publishers have online platforms. So when you buy a book, you get access to a platform. So then you know where your students can go online, which pages. So you know they are reliable. Now, the importance of feedback. As I said, this is the biggest problem, giving feedback. And like today, like now, I'm talking to you, you're typing hello, and it's hard for me to give feedback, immediate feedback, because it's a different thing being next to each other in a real life situation, in a classroom. So, like rewarding efforts, guiding your students, it's much harder doing it from a distance, using a camera. I mean, you can smile being on a camera, but it's a different thing being next to somebody and explaining something, but in person. Of course, a nice thing that we get in many online websites is the computer-graded assignment. So one nice thing is in many online platforms, or as I mentioned, when you buy a book, you get access to an online resource website created by the publisher of the book. A lot of the tasks are computer graded, so you don't have to spend extra time grading each of the exercises. On the other hand, feedback from the teacher has more impact. And it's a different thing getting like a score sheet where they got 3 correct out of 5, and a different thing explaining, giving feedback to your students when they make a mistake in real life, being next to them, explaining the problem and the mistake and why this is wrong. But another skill that gradually we can train our students now with the new reality of the online teaching is self-assessment. Now that the learners, students, spend more time at home, they can also access platforms or websites where they get it just right away after they finish the exercises, they do the activities, they get the score sheet. And also they can draw conclusions about whether they did well or not, or there's a problem. But again, this has to do with the age. If they're very young, they're teenagers, they're primary school students, we cannot do that. It's probably is more appropriate for adults. Now let's move on. Again, it lacks the biggest problem is teenagers lacking the motivation. Having to plan your time without having a teacher to supervise you, without being in a classroom. You are a teenager anyway, you don't want to study. This is a bit boring. You just want to spend the minimum time, if possible. You don't have face-to-face communication. You don't have other students. Imagine if you are in a group of students and you see the others working, studying, you think, oh, maybe I should do the same. So being completely on your own, that's one of the problems of the e-learning. And the biggest problem is procrastination by people who work at home, and especially for students. So this is something that we have to tackle. We need to have this into consideration and try to give feedback. Maybe have as many as possible live sessions, and try to give very specific tasks and strict deadlines to help them with time management. Again, not having a teacher to supervise you can lead to abandon your studies more easily. Okay, there's a social isolation. We all had social isolation the last months, 6-7 months. We were all at home. But especially that was a bigger problem for students because they had lack of pressure. Nobody to start complaining and being strict why they haven't finished their exercises. So, but of course, trying to have more live sessions can help to deal with the negative effects like this isolation, the lack of pressure, which this pressure, I mean, is something you feel it, it's not something like, I'm not saying that you have to be very strict. but just it's something that you feel while in a class. When everybody starts studying, you feel that you have to do it as well. So that's an element which is missing from online teaching. And we mentioned that again, online schools, unaccredited, we need to be. We have to make sure if we're using publishers' websites. I think this is safe, they're reliable sources. But if we have found any sources online, we have to be careful whether they're appropriate and reliable for our students, especially for teenagers or even younger. So have this in mind anyway. Now, online tools, probably most of you are already aware of this. I mean, we had to find out what to use all these months to improvise, and we had to get used to all this. I mean, maybe we have used one of these in the past. And now most books also have to be available in some form of interactive PDF, or even just a plain PDF. Or so if students need to share the screen, or you need to teach from distance, they buy the book, they can also have access to an online version of the book. So we have the video chat like Skype, Zoom, and many others available. We can change documents. They can send you their essay, email on Skype. You can screen share. A lot of publishers give you the access to interactive PDFs. I mean, we in Global ELT, we do the same. Online platforms, again, but online platforms, sometimes they're very nice, but you have to spend a lot of time trying to get used to them. Sometimes they're expensive if you don't have free access. You have to spend a lot of time trying to organize your lessons. But of course, they give you more options compared to just Skype or something like a video chat. So have all these things in mind when trying to decide what to use and what is best for you. Now, this is like a flip page book. This is a very simple. You just click and you listen to the audio. So this is an alternative. So if you have bought the book, but again, we start having problems and we cannot have real life teaching, we cannot go back to classrooms, that's another option. This is a very basic one. So you buy the book and you get access to a flip page book, which you can do the listening as well. But again, we have so many different options. Now, some things you have to be aware of before you decide to start your online video conferencing lesson, because you don't have the flexibility, because they all are in front of a screen. First of all, you have to make sure that they all have the software, the material they need, either it's PDF or whatever, that it's working, the camera, the audio, they're all working. The internet connection is fine. Then you have to design what you're planning to do in detail, like how much time, give them specific goals, detailed guidance, because they will be on their own later at home. So we mentioned that time management is a problem, even for us as teachers, that we're all at home. Imagine how a big problem it is for students who are very young. So we can help them with time management if we give them very detailed guidance on what to do, So this can help them and guide them not to spend hours doing nothing, and again rewarding them afterwards, and having like a feedback, as I said, is crucial. So if they feel that they have to do this exercise, they have a very detailed plan when to finish it, and then you can give them immediate feedback and reward them, get back to them and say, give some comments, etc. Then you can help them get a pace and not waste their time. The software, also another more advanced way to teach, is the virtual classroom, but it's quite expensive usually, unless you work for a school and they have already organized that. There's a virtual classroom that you can use. Otherwise, can be quite expensive as an individual teacher. And finally, since we still use books, and we need to find a solution that really works, that combines the old and the new, the old reality and the new reality. So we can start thinking of activities where they can use the book and also do a video session with us online, and we can help them on how to use the book and give them feedback, which is called blended learning. I'm sure you have heard this very trendy term that everybody's using, blended learning. Using it, which is actually what we do in real life. We use a little bit of everything. You always have to blend things to make something nice. It's like cooking. You have to blend many different things, like audio, video, printed books, interactive elements. They can all get together, and also our physical presence, which is missing, through a video conferencing software, something like that, like we're doing now. It's like a substitute in a way of being in a presentation, in a seminar room. So it replaces that in a way. But there are things missing. Now, how to prepare for exams? First of all, you need to decide which one is best for you. Can you do a lot of synchronous online learning? Again, you have to blend. You can do both. You can do sessions, video conferencing. You can have fixed, you can give something to everybody. You can also use the asynchronous online learning approach, where you give something to them they can do anytime they want, at midnight or whatever. They can access a website having the password that they are provided anytime during the day. If you have time, you can try and have individual online learning, have a more self-centered, student-centered approach. If you have the time again and the resources, you can also use collaborative online learning, have a Zoom meeting with many students at the same time being online. So you can do a little bit of everything. You can use all the different approaches. And the good thing with exams, because exams are very specific, you have very specific tasks, so it's easier to organize your... so if you're doing a very specific exam course, there are things that you can use. So you can teach exam skills, but actually teaching exam skills, it's like teaching generally. You just actually paying more attention to some specific details that students might find in the exam. So it's not that different. So as I mentioned, you have to think of how to combine the book with the online resources. For example, depending on the age of your students, how big your class is. Is it a one-to-one lesson? Do you have a big class with a lot of students? So you have to ask yourself all these questions. Can the students do the tests at home, or they will start cheating and trying to find the answers online? And do you want to have like a mock exam session where you will have the time exactly as in the actual exam? The time frame will be exactly the poses, so they can feel that how it is when they take the exam, or you want them to just practice at home? Again, if they're very young, probably you want them to do most parts of the tests with you, so you can supervise them. If they're older, then probably you can let them free. Again, it varies depending on your situation. And now, when it comes to exams, you need to decide where to focus on. For example, if they do an online test and you get the feedback immediately, like a score sheet, imagine there's an interactive exercise where they do the exercise and they get the feedback. Then you can get a lot of information and decide where to focus on. This is what we do when we teach. We adjust our lessons. We decide that these students are very weak when it comes to speaking. They are very weak when it comes to grammar, use of English, especially for Cambridge exams, or vocabulary. Proficiency students, they might find problems, or advanced and proficiency students with all these long texts, the gap filling exercise, the open close can be quite challenging. So you make decisions about what you should focus on, and then you try to use the material you have. You either let them do the exercises on the printed book, and then they can type their answers. If there is an interactive PDF, you can both share the screen and talk about the different problems. They can send you the answer key, for example, share documents on Skype. That's a very basic. If you have access to interactive tests online, then they can do them at home. You get the feedback. Most of the exams can be computer graded, but not all of them. The writing is not computer graded. The speaking again. The writing and the speaking are the sections that are very hard to be taught online because you need a physical presence. So have all this in mind. And again, depends on what resources you have. Do you have platforms? Do you have Zoom, Skype, interactive PDF? All these can be used with a book together. And then you can spend as much time in live sessions as we do now and give them feedback, which is the problem. And the problem again is the writing. There are websites. I just found a few where you can send them students' essays and they're getting corrected. How nice for us as teachers. So we don't have to go through and correct all this, the pack of essays that we have. But again, how can we trust? So there are resources where they can evaluate assess speaking and writing, but again, we're not sure whether we can trust this. So we need the teacher. That's why the teacher is, we cannot substitute the teacher with online resources. Again, we need somebody to supervise and give, and again, because the most important thing, and what seems to be the biggest problem, okay, the productive skills, speaking and writing, they're quite problematic to be taught online, but the biggest problem is the feedback. Feedback when somebody speaks in English, and you have to correct the pronunciation. Feedback when they write, and somebody has to intervene and say, oh, this is a problem, this is a mistake. So, many good things when it comes to online teaching, but there are also some limitations that we have to be aware of. And again, gradually, our goal is, and this is what online teaching can help us even more, is to move from teaching to learning, have autonomous learning where teachers act as they guide you, they help you, but they let you free to access a lot of material available that you are given, you're provided. So, and this also is linked to what I mentioned earlier, the self-centered, student-centered, more individualized teaching, where we help, we support, we guide, we advise our students, and since a lot of the tasks that are available online don't need our presence, they're even marked automatically by software, we can help them do a lot of work on their own. But again, has to do with the age. If they're young, they're teenagers, they're primary school students, we have to take all this into consideration. So, again, we need to think of our students and then decide what is best for them. There's nothing that automatically solves all the problems. It's up to us to decide based on our students, our specific class. Now, and again, this is something very trendy, 21st century skills. As you know, they're all talking about 21st century skills, and we all have to be trained as students to have these skills to be able to find a job. But again, there's so many different skills that you need, and probably before they come up with this term, 21st century skills, I think we were all aware that we need to acquire new skills, and this is life. Every year you have to start learning something new. Maybe in a year there will be something else that we need to learn how to use. For example, now we have to use smartphones. Imagine a few years, we have mobile apps. So this is a 21st century skill. We might then have imagine having a classroom and having a mobile app where you publish the timetable. We have classes and they all get a mobile app. So there's so many different things. And of course, now with the pandemic, this became even more important, the IT skills. Computer literacy, it was already very important, but now has become even more important. I mean, even if you are a teacher, if you had studied literature, you need, it's essential to have all these information, computer literacy skills, being able to use video conferencing, analyzing data. Otherwise, you cannot use all the information available. Critical thinking, for example, autonomous learning, working as a team, self-discipline, presenting, public speaking, all these things, collaboration. And now we are from a distance. We're using virtual workspaces. If you see the last word on the slide. Now, a new thing, we have the proctored exams. It's a C2 word, probably. Proctor, not used very often. What do we mean by proctor? That's the definition in the dictionary. To watch people taking an exam in order to check that they do not cheat, invigilate, supervise. So that's something new. The first announcement was a few months ago when TOEFL, ETS, which is the Educational Testing Services, the US organization that they produce and they administer the TOEFL exams, they came up with a proctored exams for TOEFL and GRE. So what it means is that there's proctoring software monitors your computer desktop, webcam, video, and audio, trying to make sure that you don't cheat, if this is possible. Because if you go online, you'll find a lot of people saying, "Oh, there are ways to cheat anyway, even with all this software." But now that's a new thing. Imagine taking the exam at home, in your bed, having your laptop. But you need to verify your ID, use a webcam to scan the desk and the room where you'll take the exam, and have the software that monitors your computer. So we'll see, maybe in the future, nobody knows, this might become the norm. Can you imagine that? If there is a reliable way to check that students will not cheat, and we can monitor what they do, maybe this can become more widespread. We'll see. Now, we have the proctored exams, and we also already had, and there were more and more becoming available, the computer-based exams. I mean, the trend was towards offering all the exams. I mean, all the exam boards, they were trying, their goal was eventually to offer their exams as computer-based exams. For example, Cambridge exams now are offered as they are available in computer-based format, although, especially in Europe, most people still take the paper-based exam. There's computer-delivered IELTS, language cert exams, which is a new exam board, but they have been recognized by Ofqual in the UK, and they're also recognized for getting visa to live in the UK, so they have become quite important in the UK because of that. They're also offered as computer-based exams, And of course, TOEFL, that years ago we had the computer-based, the CBT, that was replaced by the IBT, which is the internet-based. We had Bullets, which is Cambridge, but was business English, that was offered as a computer-based, and now it has been replaced by LinguaSkill. We have Aptis, a British English exam, again, as a computer-based. So there are more and more exams. Aptis, for example, is only computer-based by British Council, which is more popular in Spain and Latin America. But you can find it in other places as well. LinguaSkill is only offered as a computer-based exam. We all have to be aware of all these different exams and decide again whether our students might find it better doing the exam in front of a computer screen or do it on paper. There are some things they have to be aware of, like you have to go, when you go to the next screen, sometimes you can not go back and change your answer. There are some differences, minor differences, compared to taking the test as a paper-based exam. So we all have to be aware and make the right decisions for our students. And again, it's up to us and whether, but seems that still, especially in Europe, most people take the paper-based. Maybe now with the pandemic, there's a shift towards to the computer-based format. Proctored exams are actually internet-based because you're online. Just to make it clear, you're online. Otherwise, how can they check whether you're cheating? Whether you have somebody next to you telling you the answers? So there's a webcam. You are online. So just to make it clear, we have computer-based. IBT is internet-based. Again, you are online. TOEFL. The computer-based TOEFL was computer adaptive, which means that depending on how you answered, the software gave you a more difficult question. So it was adapting to your answers. But again, as you know, a lot of students now, they think it's easier if I do something online. It's like playing a video game. Let's take the test in front of a computer screen. It's faster. If your handwriting is not good enough, you type your essay or your email or your letter. So that's an advantage, typing your answer instead of writing. So we forgot how to write. We always type. So that's an advantage for students with a bad handwriting. They can choose a computer-based exam so they can type their answer instead of writing using a pencil or imagine. Soon it might be an old-fashioned skill, writing. And some examples of remote live invigilation is the one I mentioned earlier. This is another IELTS indicator. It's not the IELTS that you know, the IELTS academic, but actually the one which is a quite popular and very well-known test, TOEFL IBT, is available as a proctored exam. So this is something new. We have to adjust to the new reality. We have already adjusted, actually, the last few months. Let's see how it goes. But again, I think a lot of the things I mentioned, you actually learn by doing. I mean, you have to improvise. Depending on your resources, your classroom, how big your class is. You have 20 students, 25, 10, 5. You can choose the best option. And when it comes to exams, maybe you can combine the book, the online version, think of ways to combine both. And of course, technology has limitations. You need very good internet. The battery is not working. Your laptop is not working. Sometimes the book has there's some advantages using the book. So have all this in mind. And finally, as a conclusion, just to recap, online learning was the only way and probably is if things go wrong, because in many places still there are problems with the pandemic. We might still continue teaching using online resources. Advantages and limitations, we have to be aware. There's nothing, again, we have to decide based on our situation. And as in most things in life, cooking, as I mentioned, you have to blend things to make something nice. So you have to combine printed books, online resources. Try when you use only the online, you don't have any other option but to contact your students, to get in touch with your students. The only solution is the video conferencing, Skype and all the software available, Zoom, etc. Try to plan your sessions, because it can be challenging if you haven't decided in advance what you're going to say, because you will have the screen, your books, your notes, many different screens, people talking to you, so you have to plan everything. So I think mainly, very briefly, I just gave you a brief idea of what's available and my thoughts on that. I don't know if you have any questions or any feedback, but I think we will learn by doing. Being teachers, we have to improvise and think what's best and use the available resources, because we don't have everything. We don't have an amazing online platform with many to transform and move to a virtual way of teaching completely. We still need to use books. We have to think of how to use the books with the online option. So I think this is it. You can also send me emails and anything I can help. And I think the solution is the blended learning. So let's try and mix and match with what we have available. I think that's it. Anka, if you have any other suggestions. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions, but of course you can we can get in touch, and so stay safe and let's see what happens with let's hope that we will go back to our usual way of teaching and not be at home. with our pajamas. Okay. So thank you so much for being here. Goodbye. Hopefully next year, next September, I can see you in Romania. Okay, thanks. Bye.